Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling the perplexing case of Marissa Dessort, the Wisconsin babysitter, who's convicted of killing 11-week-old Benson.
Right.
And we've got a whole stack of sources here.
Yeah.
News articles, court documents, even snippets from that chilling interrogation video.
Yeah. It's
What's interesting about this case is how seemingly ordinary details, like home decor choices and a quick trip for fast food, turned out to be significant clues.
It is fascinating how these everyday elements can take on such sinister undertones when you view them through the lens of this tragic event.
Absolutely.
It really makes you question how well you can ever truly know someone.
It does. Our sources paint this really vivid picture of Marissa before the tragedy. And it's almost a masterclass in contradictions. On the surface, she was fixated on this image of the perfect mother, complete with all the live, laugh, love decor. But the reality was anything but idyllic.
It's like she was curating this perfect facade of motherhood.
Right.
But underneath, there's this chaotic world of hoarding a past riddled with childhood abuse and drug addiction.
Oh, wow.
And even the termination of her parental rights for 4 of her children. That juxtaposition is what makes this case so unsettling.
It's like she was desperately clinging to this idealized version of motherhood while simultaneously engaging in incredibly neglectful, even abusive behavior.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if this intense desire for the image of motherhood somehow overshadowed any genuine remorse or personal responsibility for her actions.
That's a really insightful observation. Psychologically, it's possible that she compartmentalized those 2 aspects of her life, allowing her to maintain this facade of loving motherhood while engaging in harmful behaviors.
That's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
And speaking of chilling, let's rewind to that awful discovery at the laundromat when Benson's mother, Heather, and her sister Jessie found him lifeless.
Right.
The sources describe this gut-wrenching scene. Their initial shock, the panic setting in as they realize he's gone, and then that instant suspicion falling on Marissa.
That scene is incredibly powerful, and it speaks to the primal fear every parent has about the well-being of their child.
Right.
Just imagine the horror of finding your baby cold and stiff, still in that rigid car seat posture from rigor mortis.
Yeah.
That image alone is enough to send shivers down anyone's spine.
It's a detail that sticks with you for sure. And what makes it even more disturbing is that looking back, there were so many red flags, warning signs that in retrospect seem glaringly obvious. Almost like a trail of breadcrumbs leading to this tragic outcome.
It's easy to judge in hindsight, but as we examine the events leading up to that moment at the laundromat, a pattern of missed opportunities and overlooked warning signs emerges.
Take, for example, the fact that Heather received those mugshots of Marissa with the child abuse charges that same day.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine receiving that information right before picking up your kids from the babysitter?
Absolutely. It speaks to the importance of trusting your gut instincts.
Right.
Even if the information seems unbelievable or outlandish, those feelings of unease should never be ignored.
Especially when it comes to the safety of a child.
And even during that pickup, our sources describe these unsettling observations. The house dimly lit, Marissa acting rushed and evasive, even a hickey on her neck. It's as if she was desperately trying to get them out the door without them noticing anything amiss.
It's like she was trying to control the narrative. To maintain that carefully constructed facade, even in the face of mounting evidence to the contrary. The hickey in particular is an interesting detail. It suggests a level of carelessness, a disregard for appearances, that's at odds with her carefully curated persona of a doting caregiver.
And then there's that detail about Benson's hat pulled down over his eyes, almost like she was deliberately concealing something.
That detail is particularly unsettling. It implies a conscious effort to hide something, perhaps even a sense of guilt or shame. And it foreshadows the web of deceit and manipulation that would soon unravel.
And that web of deceit becomes even more tangled as we delve into the bizarre encounter with the police at the Plaza Hotel later that night.
The glimpses we get from the interrogation video are just strange. Marissa pretending to be asleep when the police arrive, followed by these oddly inappropriate smiles, and forced crying during questioning. It's like watching a performance, but one that's completely off-key.
It's almost like she was drawing from a playbook of deceptive behaviors, but missing the mark entirely. It's a fascinating example of how someone trying to manipulate a situation can actually reveal more than they intend through their inconsistencies and contradictions.
It's like she thought she could just act her way out of it, but the cracks were already starting to show. And those cracks become even more evident when you look at the inconsistencies in her accounts of what happened that day. They just don't add up when compared to what her boyfriend Adam was telling the police. Like whether Benson was being fussy or not, even those little details didn't match.
Exactly. And it's not just her behavior during the interrogation that raises red flags. There was a previous investigation involving an 11-month-old girl in Marissa's care who suffered a skull fracture and a possible brain bleed. This was the case that ultimately led to the termination of her parental rights for her first 4 children. It's like a premonition of what was to come.
Right, and during that investigation, we see a similar pattern of inconsistencies and attempts to manipulate the narrative. Adam initially paints this picture of Marissa as a loving and attentive caretaker, claiming the girl simply fell off the couch. But again, with all that live, laugh, love decor in the background, it's like they're trying to create this facade of a happy, nurturing home.
It's almost as if they believe that if they project this image of domestic bliss strongly enough, it will somehow overshadow the reality of the situation. But just like with Benson's case, the authorities weren't convinced. The severity of the little girl's injuries, coupled with the inconsistencies in their stories, pointed to something far more sinister than a simple accident.
And when Marissa arrives on the scene, it's like she's completely detached from the gravity of the situation. She just casually strolls past the police and social workers, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she's being investigated for serious child abuse. It's a chilling display of indifference, especially when you consider the potential consequences.
It's a classic example of compartmentalization. She's able to shut off the emotional impact of the situation and focus on maintaining her carefully constructed facade. It's a defense mechanism that allows her to continue functioning despite the overwhelming evidence against her.
But when questioned, her story doesn't align with Adams at all. She claims she was doing dishes when the girl fell, contradicting his earlier statement that she was right there with her. It's another instance of those inconsistencies, those cracks in her carefully crafted narrative.
And these inconsistencies are crucial. They highlight a pattern of deception and inability to maintain a cohesive story when faced with scrutiny. It's like she's trying to weave together a tapestry of lies, but the threads keep unraveling, exposing the truth beneath.
And even when confronted with the previous case involving a skull fracture, she denies any involvement, claiming it wasn't her. Despite the fact that this incident resulted in the loss of her own children, she remains fixated on this idea that she's a loving mother incapable of harming a child.
It's a stunning disconnect between her words and the evidence. A disconnect that seems to be fueled by a deep-seated need to preserve her self-image as a nurturing maternal figure. It's a delusion that she clings to, even in the face of overwhelming proof to the contrary.
It's both fascinating and horrifying to see how deeply ingrained this delusion is.
Yeah.
And the situation becomes even more volatile when you consider Adam's behavior during that encounter. His explosive outbursts, his paranoia about social services, it all points to a chaotic and potentially dangerous home environment.
Absolutely. Adam's behavior adds another layer of complexity to this already disturbing puzzle. It raises questions about his role in these incidents, whether he was an active participant or simply a passive enabler of Marissa's abusive tendencies.
And yet, despite all these warning signs, all these red flags, Marissa was allowed to continue babysitting. It's a tragic failure of the system, a breakdown in communication and vigilance that ultimately had devastating consequences.
It's a harsh reminder that even with systems in place to protect children, there are still gaps, still opportunities for those who seek to harm them, to slip through the cracks.
And as we piece together the timeline of that fateful day with Benson, it becomes clear that Marissa was making deliberate choices even after realizing he was gone. That trip to McDonald's with Benson's lifeless body in the car is particularly baffling. Was it a desperate attempt to create an alibi, or was she so detached from the reality of her actions that she could simply go about her day as if nothing had happened?
It's a question that gets to the heart of her psychological state. Was she so deeply entrenched in her delusion that she couldn't process the magnitude of her actions? Or was it a cold, calculated attempt to cover her tracks? It's a chilling example of the depths of human deception.
And remember those jailhouse phone calls and letters we have in our sources. They offer yet another window into her manipulative tendencies and her persistent lack of remorse. She's constantly soliciting money, making these grand promises of marriage and children upon her release, all while downplaying the severity of her crime and painting herself as the victim.
It's a classic manipulation tactic playing on people's sympathies, exploiting their desire to believe in the good in others. And it's especially effective when she frames herself as a loving mother wrongfully accused. It's a narrative that many people are quick to embrace, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
It's incredibly frustrating to see how easily she's able to manipulate people, even from behind bars. But it also highlights the importance of critical thinking, of being able to discern truth from fiction, especially when dealing with someone who is skilled at deception.
You've hit on a crucial point. This case isn't just about the tragic loss of a young life. It's also a stark reminder of the power of manipulation and the importance of vigilance.
And it's a reminder that those with manipulative tendencies often exhibit a complete lack of remorse or accountability for their actions. They're masters at shifting blame, playing the victim, and twisting narratives to suit their needs. It's a pattern that we see repeated throughout Marissa's story.
Exactly. And in that final interrogation, when confronted with the overwhelming evidence from the autopsy, the multiple blunt force trauma to Benson's head, the fractured ankle, the abrasions that completely contradict her story, she's finally forced to admit to a level of frustration and anger that led her to drop Benson into the pack and play.
But even then, she attempts to minimize her actions, suggesting that he may have tumbled and hurt himself further. It's like she can't or won't fully grasp the brutality of what she did.
It's a classic example of minimizing and deflecting blame. She's acknowledging a small piece of the truth while still trying to distance herself from the full weight of her actions. It's a desperate attempt to salvage her carefully constructed self-image, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
And her subsequent plea of insanity, arguing that brain damage from past drug abuse rendered her incapable of controlling her actions, just further highlights this pattern of deflection. It's like she's constantly searching for an external explanation for her behavior, anything to avoid taking full responsibility.
It's a fascinating legal strategy. By claiming insanity, she's attempting to shift the blame from her conscious choices to a medical condition beyond her control. It's a way of saying, it wasn't me, it was my brain chemistry.
But ultimately, her attempts to escape accountability fail. She's sentenced to 37 years in prison, a measure of justice that, while significant, can never truly compensate for the loss of young Benson's life.
It's a sobering reminder that the wheels of justice, while they may grind slowly, do eventually turn. And while no punishment can bring back a lost child, it can at least provide a sense of closure and accountability for those left behind.
This deep dive has been a roller coaster of emotions, from anger and disbelief to sadness, and even a bit of morbid fascination. It's a case that raises so many questions about human nature, about the nature of evil, and about our ability to see through deception.
You're absolutely right. This case goes far beyond the tragic loss of a child. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about our own vulnerabilities to manipulation, and about the darkness that can lurk beneath seemingly ordinary exteriors.
Yeah, it's like we've been peeling back layers of an onion, revealing more and more unsettling truths with each new piece of information. And what's really stuck with me is how easily Marissa was able to manipulate the people around her.
Right.
Even those who should have known better.
It's a testament to the power of deception, especially when it's carefully crafted and delivered with conviction. Think about those jailhouse letters, for example. She was essentially running a con from behind bars,
Right.
creating this persona of a doting mother, wrongfully accused, desperately seeking financial support, and a loving partner.
It's textbook manipulation, preying on people's sympathies, exploiting their desire to believe in the good in others, and their willingness to help those they perceive as victims. It's amazing that she managed to secure money and attention from multiple men, all while sitting in a prison cell.
It speaks to the fact that even intelligent, well-intentioned individuals can fall prey to manipulation tactics, especially when those tactics tap into deeply ingrained emotional responses like compassion and a sense of justice.
It makes you wonder how we can become more discerning, more attuned to those subtle signs of manipulation in our own lives. Because clearly, it's not always as obvious as we might think.
That's a great question, and it's something we should all be actively considering. It starts with awareness. Recognizing the tactics that manipulators often use, things like playing the victim love bombing, making grandiose promises, guilt-tripping, or even isolating you from your support network.
And being willing to question inconsistencies, to dig a little deeper when things don't add up or when someone's words don't match their actions. It's about trusting your gut instinct when something feels off, even if you can't quite put your finger on why.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the importance of setting boundaries, protecting yourself from those who try to exploit your kindness or empathy. It's okay to say no, to walk away from situations that feel unhealthy or unsafe, even if it means disappointing someone or challenging their narrative.
This case, as tragic as it is, offers a powerful lesson in the importance of discernment, of protecting ourselves and those we care about from those who might seek to do us harm.
It's a stark reminder that evil can often wear a charming mask, and that true vigilance requires a critical eye, a willingness to question what we see and hear, and the courage to trust our gut instincts.
Thinking back on all the details we've uncovered, it's easy to spot the red flags in Marissa's behavior now. But how can we apply those lessons to everyday situations where the stakes might not seem as high?
It's about cultivating that healthy dose of skepticism, that willingness to look beyond the surface and consider multiple perspectives. Remember, manipulators are skilled at creating illusions, at presenting a carefully curated version of reality that serves their own needs.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's worth asking yourself, what aspects of Marissa's behavior stood out to you as particularly deceptive? And how can you apply the lessons learned here to your own interactions and decision-making to protect yourself and those you care about from falling prey to manipulation?
It's by engaging in these reflections, by sharpening our critical thinking skills, and by being more aware of the tactics used by manipulators that we can honor Benson's memory and hopefully prevent future tragedies from unfolding.
This case has been a stark reminder that knowledge is power, especially when it comes to recognizing and resisting manipulation.
Stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.
And until next time, keep diving deep.